In our last evidences lesson, which can be found on our website if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, we began to make the case for the existence of God, and in doing so, we used the cosmological argument, which is also called sometimes the law of cause and effect, to begin making our case. And we pointed out that every effect must have an adequate cause. You only get nothing from nothing in the natural world, and therefore someone must have existed before the universe came into existence. It makes no sense to say that something came from nothing without a supernatural element. We expanded on that more in that lesson last month. Today we want to move to a second argument that we might use to prove the existence of a supreme being, to prove the existence of the Almighty God. And this argument is called the teleological argument. Now, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines teleology as the study of evidences of design in nature. And the goal in our study of the teleological argument is to suggest the evidence of design in the natural world suggests a designer who had a purpose or a function for this world. If we're to put the teleological argument in syllogistic form, this is what it would look like in logical form. If the universe evinces purposeful design, there must have been a designer. Okay, that's the first premise there. The universe does evince purposeful design, and we're going to see that a little bit here and try to point that out today. And therefore, the universe must have had a designer. That's the basic argument. Now, some of that might seem a little bit heavy. And so I want to try to share the idea of the teleological argument with you by means of an illustration. So here's what we're going to use in terms of an illustration today. Have any of you seen Home Alone? Okay. It's one of my favorite holiday movies. Right? So this is the house from Home Alone that we're familiar with. That's over in Chicago. Go drive by that today. But in Home Alone, we know some of the scenes, right? Just to quickly remind you of some of those scenes. This is the actual battle plan that I believe Kevin McAllister was his name, played by Macaulay Culkin, came up with, right? He's got the paint can and the light bulb and the iron falling down the laundry chute, and there's a nail on the steps that he steps on. There's the ornaments and the micro machine cars that he sets outside the window so that when they step on that with bare feet. There's the red hot doorknob. There's the tripwire. You know, we could just actually look at some of it. So there's the red hot doorknob. He burns his hand on that. We move on through to the next scene. There's him going in the door, and we have the fire on his head that trips the wire when the door is opened. He puts water on the steps, right? And that creates ice, and he slips down the steps on the ice going into the basement there. He has had tar on his feet, took his shoes off, and so he gets through the window and steps down on all these little sharp, pointy things. And then he tries to come in through the dog chute, and Kevin is there with his BB gun to shoot him in the head. He looks up from the basement, gets hit with the iron that's coming down the laundry chute. As he's stepping barefoot, he steps onto the nail, which I would just leave at that point. And then this guy gets tarred and feathered, so that's part of the plan as well. And then as they come up the steps, there's Kevin throwing the paint cans at them down the steps. And of course, there's the tarantula of his brother on his face. Okay, you remember all that, okay? When you look at all of those various traps from Home Alone, all of those sequential steps that were taken, would it be reasonable to say that there was a mastermind behind it all? Yeah, so somebody had to think of all the little traps and snares and all of those things. And so the answer is obviously there's a design, there's a master plan, there's a battle plan behind all of these things. And Kevin McAllister is the mastermind behind it all. That's why we're so impressed that some little kid can protect his home as powerfully as he did. And that essentially, that idea that you can't look at all of these things that seem to indicate that there's design, that there's a mastermind. You can't look at all of these evidences and believe that there's no brain behind it. That's essentially what the teleological argument is. It's looking at the universe's body of evidence for fine-tuning and asking if there is a mastermind behind it all. And so that's what we want to think about here today. So we're going to move away from the wet bandits, think a little bit about some evidence for why there's a God and why the world has been designed. So let's take a look at some fine-tuning. I want to point out, first of all, that the universe, based upon the research and the comments of scientists, the universe itself seems to be finely tuned. We're going to look at the universe as a whole, and then we're going to kind of come down and think about some other things. But Guillermo Gonzalez is the author of The Privileged Planet, and Lee Strobel quotes him in The Case for Creators. We found that our exact location in the universe, in our galaxy, in our solar system, as well as such things as the size and the rotation of the Earth, the mass of the moon and sun, and so forth, a whole range of factors conspire together in an amazing way to make Earth a habitable planet. All right? Now, that's the argument of one scientist, and we're going to see and break down some of the specific things that suggest fine-tuning and design. But I want you to think about what he says versus what other scientists say. Oxford scientist Richard Dawkins has said, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And so Dawkins says, it seems like there's no design. He said that in Science magazine in 1997. Physicist John Gibbon described life on our planet as Earth's lucky break. And so we just got lucky here. There's no mastermind behind this. This is not a God that doesn't believe in a supernatural. It's just luck. Carl Sagan once described Earth as a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. Some people who deny the existence of a God, this is what Lee Strobel said about some scientists. He says it seems like their belief is that life is as easy as a soup mix. You just add water and boom, we've got life. They make it sound really simple. But is life really so easy that it could be the result of a mere fluke? Or is there evidence of design? Is it design or is it just good fortune and luck? So that's what we're thinking about. Guillermo Gonzalez says there's a lot of factors that conspire together to make Earth a habitable planet. Let's think about what some of those factors might be. First of all, he mentions our galaxy. When you look at the galaxy that we are in, we're in the Milky Way galaxy, right? He says that this galaxy just happens to be the right shape and the right size. He says as you study galaxies, not any galaxy will do for there to be life. Some galaxies are too close to one another or too close to another large galaxy so that the galaxies actually interfere gravitationally with each other. He says galaxies that are too elliptical or too irregular also would have a difficult time sustaining a stable star system. Our galaxy, however, is a nicely organized spiral. And he says how many galaxies might be the right size and shape and in the right kind of location? He says no one's sure, but an estimate of 1 in every 1,000 is reasonable. That's out of the book, 20 Compelling Evidences That God Exists from Kenneth Boa and Robert Bowman. They expand on this idea here in Case for a Creator. It says, in terms of habitability, I think we are in the best possible place in our galaxy, keep in mind. And that's because our location provides enough building blocks to yield an Earth while providing a low level of threats to life. He says, I really can't come up with an example of another place in the galaxy that is as friendly to life as our location. Sometimes people claim you can be part of any galaxy. He says, I've studied other regions, spiral arms, galactic centers, globular clusters, edge of disks, and no matter where it is, it's worse for life. He says, I can't think of any better place than where we are. Our galaxy optimizes habitability because it provides safe zones. He goes on to say, galaxies have varying degrees of star formation. And where there's star formation, there's interstellar gases that coalesce to form stars, star clusters. There's massive stars that blow up as supernova. In places with active star formation are very dangerous because that's where you have supernova exploding at a fairly high rate. In our galaxy, those dangerous places are primarily in the spiral arms, where there are also hazardous giant molecular clouds. Fortunately, though, we happen to be situated safely between the Sagittarius and the Perseus spiral arms. And so in terms of stars and the fact where we are compared to the sun, which is a star, we are in the right position. He also mentions that we are in the right position with regard to the planets in our solar system. He says more and more astronomers are learning how the other planets tie into the habitability of Earth. For example, he says George Wetherill of the Carnegie Institution showed in 1994 that Jupiter, which is huge, it's more than 300 times the mass of the Earth, that Jupiter acts as a shield to protect us from too many comet impacts. Jupiter actually deflects comets, keeps many of them from coming into the inner solar system where they could collide with Earth with life-extinguishing consequences. And so we're protected by Jupiter. He goes on to say, in addition, other planets in our inner solar system protect us from getting bombarded by asteroids from the asteroid belt. The asteroids are mostly between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Our first line of defense is Mars, being at the edge of the asteroid belt. And it takes a lot of hits for us. Venus does too. And so our galaxy, we're in the right galaxy. We happen to have the right planets around us, which are protecting us from possible destruction. And so where we are in the galaxy seems to indicate the fine-tuning of our universe and of our galaxy. In addition to the fine-tuning that we see in our universe, though, I want to look a little closer at our planet and notice a few aspects which just seem to be too perfect to be coincidental here on Earth. Here's a quick chart, which is going to cover some of the things we're going to look at, but we are just the right relationship to the sun. We just happen to be just the right distance away. If we were closer to the sun, it would be too hot on Earth for us to live. If we were further away from the sun, it would get too hot. We have the right tilt. We have just the right atmospheric conditions. We also have just the right gravitational pull. If gravity was just a little bit stronger, we'd all be getting smashed down into the ground. If it was too loose, we'd be floating. We have the right gas proportions in terms of oxygen and carbon dioxide and things like that. We have just the right moon. We're going to point that out in a minute. It is the right distance from the Earth. It's the right size. It also has the right rotation, which has something to do with the ocean tides as well. And we also have the right terrestrial crust. We have the right crust thickness so that we can grow crops. We have the right amount of water on our Earth so that we can live as well, and the right mineral composition. Let me show you some ways that's true. For example, let's think about the Earth's crust. This is again from the Case for Creator. He says, if Earth were smaller, like Mars, it would cool down too quickly. The bigger the planet, the higher the surface gravity, and the less surface relief between the ocean basins and the mountains. The higher the surface gravity of a planet, the greater the pull of the gravity on the mountains, and the tendency would be toward creating a smooth sphere. Think what would happen if our planet were a smooth sphere. The Earth has a lot of water in its crust. And the only reason that we are not a water world right now is because we have continents and because we have mountains. So if you were to smooth out all of the lands, water would be at a depth of 2 kilometers, and you would have a water world. And if you have a water world, you have a dead world. There's no life. And so we have just the perfect amount of gravity, just the right size earth in just the right kind of crust. He goes on, there's more that we could share. We also have the right atmosphere. He says a terrestrial planet must have a minimum mass to retain an atmosphere. You need an atmosphere for the free exchange of the chemicals of life and to protect inhabitants from cosmic radiation. And you need an oxygen-rich atmosphere to support big-brain creatures like humans, right? We breathe oxygen. We need oxygen. Earth's atmosphere is 20% oxygen. Just right, it turns out. And the plant, just right. We just happen to have the perfectly right amount of oxygen to breathe. The planet also has to be a minimum size to keep the heat from its interior from being lost too quickly. It's the heat from its radioactive decaying interior that drives the critically important mantle convection inside the Earth. Okay, we have just the right amount of oxygen in our atmosphere. We also just happen to be the right relationship to the sun. This is, again, from 20 compelling evidences that God exists. Location, location, location. The most basic requirement for a decent planet to support life is its location. Presumably, as one or more planets formed around a star, such planets could form at virtually any distance from that star between the extremes of so close that it's pulled into the star or so far that it escapes the star's gravity. Yet the region around the star within which a planet must consistently orbit in order to sustain life, at least above the level of a microbe, is a very narrow band. For example, for our sun, that band is a region roughly 90 to 100 million miles from the sun, and Earth happens to orbit around 93 million miles away. So again, we just happen to be in the right place in contrast to the sun. That's just a coincidence, right? Well, we go on, and Strobel again writes in The Case for a Creator, the sun is highly stable, more so than most comparable stars. Its light output only varies by 0.1% over a full sunspot cycle, which is about 11 years. And this prevents, because our star is pretty stable, it prevents wild climate swings on the Earth. It would take a star with the highly unusual properties of our sun has the right mass, the right amount of light, the right composition, it's the right distance, it has the right orbit, and it's in the right galaxy, and it's in the right location to nurture living organisms on a circling planet. So that makes our sun and our planet very rare indeed. So Earth has the right crust, it has the right sun, it has the right relationship to the sun. This is from Bert Thompson in his book, Rock Solid Faith. He says the sun's interior temperature is estimated to be over 20 million degrees Celsius. The Earth, however, is located exactly the correct distance from the sun to receive the proper amount of heat and radiation to sustain life as we know it. If the Earth were moved just 10% closer to the sun, far too much heat and radiation would be absorbed. If the Earth were moved just 10% further from the sun, too little heat would be absorbed. In other words, we would either burn to death or we would freeze to death. We just happen to be the right distance from the sun. But what's also awesome is we also have the right moon. Earth also benefits greatly from having a large moon. With all the planets in our solar system, Earth is the only one to have such a large moon. And it turns out to be just the right size and distance away from the Earth to help stabilize Earth's orbit and to produce tidal effects that are significant but not destructive. Bert Thompson expands on that a little bit. It says the Earth is poised some 240,000 miles from the moon, whose gravitational pull produces ocean tides. If you were to move the moon closer to the Earth by just a fifth, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day, the tides would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the Earth's surface. What's that mean? Again, water world, right? We die. Constant tsunamis every single day. That's no way to live. But the moon happens to be in just the right place so that our gravitational pull is perfect for our tides. Here's what the tides also do, and Strobel mentions this as well in his book. He says, tides serve an important role by flushing out nutrients from the continents to the oceans, which keeps the oceans more nutrient rich than they otherwise would be. It's good that we don't have just still water over all the earth. You know, what is still water like when you see just a still pond? It gets kind of murky and mucky and dirty. But we have tides, which help kind of clean and cleanse things. It says the lunar tides also help to keep large-scale ocean circulation going, and that's important because the oceans carry a lot of heat, which is necessary to keep the temperature of the higher latitudes relatively mild. So if we didn't have tides and if we didn't have some circulation going in our water, things would get too cold up north. The water continues to move, which helps balance out the temperature in our world. It also just so happens that our Earth is at the right tilt and at the right rotation, right? You guys have studied this in science class. You know the Earth is at a 23.5-degree tilt. Yes? No? No, or were you not paying attention? No. Okay. Okay. I was talking to Hattie, not you, Nolan. I would never try to hurt you, Nolan. I only pick on my own kids, all right? All right. The case for a creator says this: the moon actually stabilizes the tilt of the Earth's axis. And the tilt is responsible for our seasons. With the Earth's tilt at 23.5 degrees, that gives us very mild seasons. So in a very real way, the stability of our climate is attributable to the moon as well. So we just happen to be at the right tilt. Rock Solid Faith asked this question: so what if our tilt was different? What if we were tilted at a different degree? What would happen if the rotation, what if the rotation of the Earth was different too? What would happen if the rotation rate of the Earth were cut in half, so we were rotating much more slowly? Or what if it was doubled? We were spinning a lot faster. If it were cut in half, the seasons would be doubled in their length, which would mean winter would be twice as long. And life would not be worth living in Indiana if that were the case here, okay? But if it were half, the seasons would be doubled in their length, which would cause such harsh heat and cold over much of the earth that it would be difficult, if not impossible, here's the big thing, to grow enough food to feed the earth's population. If the rotation rate were doubled, that is, we're spinning faster, the length of each season would be cut in half, and it would be difficult or impossible to grow enough food to feed the Earth's population. We have just the right amount of time for planting season so that we can get to harvest season, so that we can feed people. You cut that in half or you double the rotation, all of that changes. All right. That's a lot of things about the galaxy and about where we are as the planet Earth and in our galaxy and in compared to the sun and compared to the moon, that to me, when you take all of those factors together, maybe if I gave you just one of those factors, you could say, oh, that's just coincidence, that's just luck. But when you take all of those things together, how is it that all of those things are just so perfect? Work out just so right so that we can have life. And if any one of those things is off, then basically we're dead. There is no life. There's no chance that we could be living. So that's amazing to me as you consider that. But here's something even more amazing. And when you look in the mirror, it's you. All right? You are amazing. The body that God has given us and that God has created, that we live in every single day, our bodies are amazing. And I want you just to think for a minute. We could get into a lot of detail with this, but I'm just going to go through a few things. As you look at all these different systems of the human body, I want you to consider how amazing our body is, that we have fine-tuned bodies. All right? The body's comprised of various systems, and I want you to do a little bit of comparing. All right? We have the circulatory system, right? It's the blood and the blood vessels that are pumping through all the veins and the arteries. And, all right? Let's imagine that we have a car engine. okay? And that car engine uses gas and it uses oil to fuel the car. When you look at a car engine and when you see the gas and the oil and where everything gets pumped and all the fluids get flowing, do you think that's designed when you look at an engine, or do you think that it's a fluke? It's obvious, right? When we think of Henry Ford, we think of someone who helped design the motor car's engine. But it's amazing that some people, they don't think of God as we consider the human heart, which pumps about 6,000 pounds of blood through 10,000 arteries and veins of the body every 24 hours, and it does so for 60 to 90 years. Generally lasts a lot longer than most of our cars do. So that's a fluke, but the engine is designed that, you're going to be replacing, if you're lucky, 10 years from now. What about the nervous system, right? I want you to think about a computer microchip for a minute. All the information of a microchip, it kind of goes through this central station, and it sends and it receives signals. And it's interesting that we think of Bill Gates and we think of Steve Jobs when we think of microprocessors of computers, but we don't think of God as we consider the human brain, which is sending and receiving signals even while we're sleeping so that we can live. What about a nebulizer? If you've ever had asthma or your kids have had asthma. Hattie had asthma when she was a little girl and went to the ICU a couple times with asthma attacks. And so we have a nebulizer on hand just in case there's any issues with that. But that nebulizer, it's a breathing machine. And that machine basically converts liquid medicines into a gaseous breathable state. And we look at that nebulizer, somebody must have designed that. And we're thankful if you have asthma and you've ever used one of those or you've had a breathing problem, you're thankful for those nebulizers. It's designed, right? But we have lungs that use oxygen to feed blood cells, and that's just a fluke when we think of the respiratory system. And then we have the digestive system, right? We look at a house and we look at its plumbing and we consider the sinks and the toilets, and they all feed through piping to your septic tank, which disposes of the waste. And I'm very thankful that we live in the modern world we do, where that happens. And we see all of that, and it's designed, right? It's not a fluke. Somebody came into your house and they piped everything in just the right way. They made sure that it was all leading, towards the septic system. They installed your toilet. They sealed everything up to make all of that work. And yet we look at our body, which uses food and water for fuel. It then converts it into a disposable waste, and that's just a fluke. How will that happen? What about the skeletal system, right? You look at a house, somebody frames a house, and you find the foundation, and you find the studs, and you have the trusses at the top. And we know when we look at a house, somebody designed that. Somebody's getting paid because they were the architect behind that. Somebody came in and they built that. And yet we look at the skeletons on our bodies, and it just so happens that our bones are structured the way that they are. That's just luck. Or the muscular system. The muscular system is like our armor. We know what armor does, right? Your muscular system protects your bones. It protects your organs. Is that designed or is that a fluke? We look at a camera, right? The new iPhone comes out, and we're like, I got to get the new iPhone. What? It's got a better camera. It blurs the background behind people. So awesome, right? But we look at that camera and we think, I'm thankful for the people that designed that and who continue to design those things and make those things even better. And yet, as good as those cameras are, they're not as amazing as this camera that's right here in your head, your eyeball. We see that far more advanced human eye, and there's people who say that's chance. There's no designer behind it. So we see design in all of the operating systems involved in cars and machinery and houses and more. And yet we see even more advanced operating systems that last longer than those that people here on earth have engineered in the human body. And we say, that's chance. And we haven't even touched, it'd be a fun lesson. We haven't even touched on the amazing design elements we see in incredibly unique animals like the camel, the giraffe, the chameleon, the eel, the skunk, the bombardier beetle, which shoots gas out of itself. That's pretty amazing. The hummingbird, the kangaroo that just happens to have a pouch. By the way, all of these animals are so different from each other. It's kind of hard to believe how they evolved because they have very unique characteristics from one another and so many more. We haven't even gone there yet to think about their fine-tuning. Well, the question is this all luck? Is this all chance? Or does it indicate design? And I want to quote to you from a few scientific minds here as you think about our galaxy being the right shape and size, the right position and composition. We have the right planets around us. We're the right age and the right mass. You think about our planet having the right terrestrial cusp. We just happen to have the right atmosphere with oxygen. And by the way, we have lots of plants in the ocean who are producing oxygen, so we can continue to have that right amount of oxygen. The right relationship to the sun, the right moon, the right tilt, and then our human body. We look at all these things, and is it evidence of a lucky break or of a powerful God? Well, let me quote a few people to you. This, first of all, is Sir Martin Rees. He's the Astronomer Royal of Great Britain. He's a fellow of Trinity College, the Emeritus Professor of Cosmology and Astrophysics at the University of Cambridge. All right, so he's got a lot of what my grandma would say alphabet soup behind his name. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine tuning. This guy's a lot smarter than I am when it comes to that stuff. He seems to think that there are examples of fine tuning when physicists look into the world. Take a look at Robert Jastrow, who is an astronomer. So we're going to look at people who are considered experts in different fields. But he writes in God and the Astronomers, he says, this is in Robert Jastrow's book, I'm sorry. So this is actually NASA astrogeologist John O'Keefe. He says, we are, by astronomical standards, a pampered, cosseted, cherished group of creatures. Our Darwinian claim to have done it all ourselves is as ridiculous and as charming as a baby's brave efforts to stand on its own feet and refuse his mother's hand. If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. He says, it is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in. I want you to see, there's scientists out there who believe that there's a God behind it all. Don't let any school teachers fool you. There are very smart and educated people who believe that. This is from Fred Hoyle, who was a scientist long ago, but his quote is pretty famous. He says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. It says the chance that higher forms have emerged in this way by just chance, by just a natural process, no supernatural. He says it's comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. Just no chance. That's how it happened. This individual is an atheist, doesn't believe in God, but I do want you to see what he says. He's a theoretical physicist and futurist. He says it's shocking to find how many of the familiar constants of the universe lie within a very narrow band that makes life possible. And it says if a single one of these accidents were altered, stars would never form, the universe would fly apart, DNA would not exist, life as we know it would be impossible, Earth would flip over or freeze, and so on. So here's an atheist confirming, by the way, a lot of things that we've just said, largely from people who believe in God and are trying to prove it with science as well. He may not believe in a God, but he certainly sees fine-tuning, doesn't he? That if any of this were different, we wouldn't exist. Stephen Hawking says the remarkable fact is the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. And then we also have David Douche, who's a physicist at the University of Oxford. He says, if anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. Special features are surprising and they are unlikely. When you compare Earth and the people who are inhabiting Earth to any other planet, any other place throughout the universe, there's something different about where we are. And he says it's obvious. A couple more. This is Paul Davies, who is a recipient of the Templeton Prize, the Kelvin Medal from the UK Institute of Physics, and the Michael Faraday Prize. He says, there is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. You know what? What all of these people have said, that it seems like there's some fine-tuning, well, that's what inspiration says too. That's what God's word already tells us if we would just trust it. That there is a God behind our earth. There is a God behind our universe. This is what the psalmist wrote in Psalm 19, verses 1 and 2. The heavens declare the glory of God. If you'll search it out, if you'll think about it, if you'll look at this amazing universe that we live in, it declares to you how awesome our God is. The firmament shows his handiwork. Who's the one who's the designer, the engineer behind it all? The handyman? It's God. The firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech. Night unto night reveals knowledge. In Psalm chapter 8, which is where Larry read at the outset of our lesson, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens, and when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. Why are they in the perfect place, the perfect position? Because God put them there. God designed it that way. He says, and it's amazing to me that when I look at that, what is man that you are mindful of him? Little old me in the middle of this vast universe. It's amazing that you care for me. Psalm 139, it says, you formed my inward parts. Why do our bodies work the way that they do? Because God designed them. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And I think the more that you study the human body, that is so true. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we haven't even got into DNA yet. We'll get into that on its own lesson. Our bodies are amazing. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. And then we get to the New Testament, where Paul wrote in Romans 1:20, since the creation of the world, what does the creation tell us? Well, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Look, Paul believed in the teleological argument. Look at the world. Look at the fine-tuning of our universe and our planet and our bodies, and we see by the things that are made his eternal power and Godhead. That there is a God, and we are without excuse as we stand before him. What is the purpose of all of this information that we've shared here today? Well, the purpose is quite simple. If you've been doubting and you've been disbelieving in our awesome God and in our Creator, then you need to stop. You need to process this information, realize that God is speaking to you through his universe. God is speaking to you as you contemplate our planet. He's speaking to you when you look at the moon with every breath of oxygen, which just happens to be perfect in our atmosphere. God is speaking. With every heartbeat, God is reminding us of just how powerful and awesome and wise that he is. All of these factors are not coincidences. We are not accidents. You are not an accident. God created the world with a purpose. And man, small though we may be, we are his most special creation. Creation that he loved and that he created for his purpose in this incredible universe. And if you're not living for your Creator yet, we would invite you tonight to start making that decision, to start living for him. Our God is real, and he doesn't just want you to learn that he is, but he also wants you to start learning about his word, where he reveals to you how he would have you to live your lives to be pleasing to him.